Welcome to the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Louisville attorney Jim Desmond has been handling injury cases related to traffic accidents for over 20 years. Jim will provide valuable information to help you and your family. He wants you to understand the important issues you need to know when it comes to handling car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. There's a lot riding on this, so let's get started. All right, welcome back to episode 9. We've got 9 episodes already of the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Jim Desmond's in the studio with us today, and now that the weather's finally changing, we're going to start talking about motorcycles and some motorcycle issues. Jim, welcome back to the studio. Let's jump into this.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, we wanted to talk about motorcycle accidents today. I don't want people to tune out, though, because of that. I don't want them to say, hey, I don't have a motorcycle, I don't need to listen. It's really just the opposite. We've been talking a lot about car wrecks in general. Motorcycle wrecks, I tell people that it's kind of like the law school exam question where when we took law school exams, they threw 20 different scenarios into, 3 paragraphs. Well, that's how a motorcycle wreck works, is everything we've been talking about to date, it kind of tests it to its limit. Yeah. So when people hear about a motorcycle wreck, I want them to understand we're going to be relating it somewhere in some spots to a car wreck, but generally everything we're talking about can apply in both scenarios.
And there are some differences, obviously, and one of the first areas has to do with the damages.
Right. Usually, that's the problem I usually have right off the bat with motorcycle accidents is that, there's no protection around the motorcyclist. So instead of a case where you have a, $2,000 ER bill, you might come out and have a $15,000, $20,000 ER bill because, again, you're doing more CT scans and everything on that motorcyclist trying to make sure he's okay.
Yeah, and so, obviously you've got probably some head injuries. You've probably got some broken bones. But you're going to have an ambulance there. You're going to have trips to the ER. You're going to have a lot more involved in a couple of days in the ER. Just medical bill wise.
Not always, but sometimes, yes. Yeah. And that's the thing is, my experience on motorcycles, I see surgery more often from motorcycle wrecks. And the problem with surgeries in general, I think it's a fair conservative estimate, $20,000 to $60,000, depending on what you're dealing with. And then just even on the cases that I've seen in motorcycle accidents that do not have surgeries, usually there's so much concern about the motorcyclist that the CT scans, if an MRI, whatever it might be done, there's several of them usually done in the emergency room, and you're probably talking on average $15,000 to $25,000 for an ER visit alone.
When you look at the required automobile accident coverage, I would think the majority of what you're dealing with are really these medical bills. You've got everything else, but realistically, if I hit at State Farm policy limits of $25,000, you're well beyond that in some of these motorcycle accidents. With
the motorcycle, sure, you absolutely can be. So what does that do? Like we were just talking about, that pulls into everything we've talked about to date, which is okay. You have the need for the underinsured coverage on the motorcycle policy, okay, and potentially an automobile policy. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But also using your health insurance, for example, to lessen the medical bills. So again, I see all these TV advertisers lately, and they're driving me nuts, to be honest, okay? Because they all want to say, we can get you a check, we can get you a check. Well, that is half the equation for a good personal injury attorney, okay? The first half is, what can I get you in the right hand for your settlement, okay? And as I'm explained to you, sometimes that depends not so much upon your damages, but the insurance coverage on the other driver. But the second half that is just as important that every personal injury attorney should be able to answer is, who is going to get or take part of your settlement? And that's where we've been talking about health insurance liens. Jim, you just mentioned unpaid medical bills, those type of things. And a good personal injury attorney should be able to tell you both right off, well, not right off the bat, but give you a good indication right off the bat which way it's going to happen. And that's why when we have somebody come in the door, if I have somebody come in from a motorcycle accident, my first step is to try to evaluate how much insurance is on the other driver and get that emergency room bill right off the bat. Because again, the state minimum is $25,000. So if you have an insurance policy that's the state minimum and you got a $25,000 bill, boom, we're already in a situation where my client is basically potentially in the hole from a car wreck he did not cause.
Right, a collision with a car.
Yes,
that he or she didn't.
Yeah, motorcycle wreck.
Yeah. Now let's go back. I know we've talked about this and you've blogged extensively about this, but coming back to the uninsured motorist and underinsured motorist coverage, and how that's going to factor into why that's so important for a motorcyclist.
Well, and that's just it. Okay, go back to the idea everybody wants to think that the law says the other guy's at fault, he owes me all my damages. That's not true. Okay, the law endeavors to be fair, but it doesn't succeed. And that's one of the biggest ways is that you have to only have a state minimum amount of insurance. Well, in Kentucky and Indiana, it's $25,000 per person. You can go into other states. I think Florida's 10 or 15. I think it's Nevada or something like that. It's down to 10. It's ridiculous amounts. Right. Okay. So how do you protect yourself? Well, you have to buy this uninsured and underinsured coverage and put it on your own motor vehicle. And the uninsured says, okay, the other guy had no insurance. He caused my damages. He was at fault. He didn't have any insurance. My company will act like they insure him up to whatever I purchased on my policy. Underinsured is, okay, he was insured, but not for enough. My damages are more than that. Motorcycle wreck with, say, $60,000 worth of bills and $25,000 in insurance coverage. Easy example right there. It says, I can go collect that $25,000 of liability coverage on the at-fault driver and then still preserve a claim against my client's underinsured coverage for more because, again, his claim was worth more than I could collect from what we call the tortfeasor, the at-fault driver.
Well, let me ask you this. If I own a motorcycle, if I ride a motorcycle, but I also have a car, which I would think most people do, at least in Kentucky, Indiana, where we are, I'm going to have an automobile policy. Does that cover my motorcycle? And I know generally I've got no fault coverage as an automobile driver. How is that different from my motorcycle?
Well, you hit two questions there, really. The first one is you cannot assume an automobile policy will apply to a motorcycle accident, okay? We all get these big insurance policies, these booklets from the insurance companies. They're 50 or 60 pages long, and there are a lot of legalese. And in those, they have all these things. They start with everything and say, we're going to cover all this under the sun. And then after each section, if you ever look at it, they'll have a section called exclusions. And many, many times they have exclusions in there pertaining to motorcycles. And they say, look, if you basically own a motorcycle or operate one regularly, then we're not going to cover it. So that's where you cannot take that chance. You have to, this uninsured and underinsured coverage, and let me clarify. If it's a boat, if it's a ATV, a motorcycle, any other normal vehicle, motorhome, you don't take the chance. You've got to have that separate kind of insurance on that policy for that vehicle.
So it is best to carve out a separate policy to cover that motorcycle.
Right, because you don't know. Now, that being said, you also have to, I'm not going to tell you I don't fish, okay? A lot of what I do when it comes to personal injury cases is, fishing for the right kind of coverage. So I have had cases. I had one motorcycle case I remember years ago where it looked like there was no uninsured coverage on the motorcycle. The vehicle that he gave me, he had 4 vehicles insured by State Farm. And the one that he gave me the deck sheet for, the declarations page for, it looked like there was no uninsured motorist coverage. On that one, I had to basically go back and search a little bit on that policy, and State Farm had actually put uninsured coverage on another vehicle, and they didn't have the exclusion. So the short story was they agreed it applied to the motorcycle accident, but they only had, it only had, if you looked at the policy, I think it was like a $25,000/$50,000 uninsured policy, and it applied for this one vehicle. And the reason they did that, they didn't want to have uninsured coverage on each of those cars. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we'll come back to that in a second.
But coming back to no-fault insurance, that's also a problem for motorcyclists.
You don't get it.
These policies.
Right? Yeah, you don't get it right off the bat.
Is it an option? I mean, can I buy that?
You can buy it.
My motorcycle policy, is that?
I apologize. I spoke over you.
Okay.
But yes, no-fault insurance. Yes, you can buy on a motorcycle. Okay. The first thing is, it's true no-fault insurance is expensive on a motorcycle. Okay. Most motorcyclists will not have it. It's not standard. In a car, let's go back to we said car versus motorcycles. If you're in a car accident in Kentucky and your vehicle's insured in Kentucky, you've got this no-fault insurance. It's automatic.
Which you can clarify is also commonly referred to as PIP coverage, personal injury protection.
PIP, no-fault,
same
thing. Right.
Okay.
Motorcycles, they don't do that. Motorcycles, they consider to be a dangerous instrument. So they treat you immediately like your car was uninsured. Okay. So as soon as you get on a motorcycle, it says, look, not only are you not entitled to this no-fault or PIP coverage, but the medical bills and lost wages that could be paid under that no-fault, the first $10,000, you're not entitled to recover that from that fault driver. You follow me?
Yep.
So in other words, you just run a motorcycle accident, you had a $15,000 ER bill, okay, and you got the other guy was at fault. Well, the liability carrier, the insurance company for the at-fault driver is looking at it like you've got $5,000 in medical bills, not $15,000, because you can't recover the first 10. It penalizes you as if you were an uninsured driver, like of an automobile. Totally unfair, but that's how they do it. Now, a little exception that everybody gets wrong on this, that everybody needs to pay attention to. That is for the driver or operator of a motorcycle. All right, a passenger cannot get PIP or no fault coverage from the motorcycle policy unless it's purchased, right? But they can recover their medical bills from the at-fault driver.
Okay, so the person who actually hits the motorcycle, the passenger, has a PIP claim there.
Not a PIP claim.
Not a PIP claim. Okay,
but back to that example with the $15,000 worth of bills.
$10,000 is not exempted.
Right.
For the passenger.
Right, and everybody gets that wrong because there's 2 or 3 statutes you have to look at that go back and forth on that. Okay, but that's the answer: is that the operator of the motorcycle not only can't get the PIP, they can't recover the first $10,000 in medical bills and lost wages. The passenger can't get the PIP, but they can recover the first $10,000 in medical bills. Okay. It's the pedestrian PIP. I want to hit one more point because motorcyclists are out there seeing their policy and they're like, no, I saw PIP on it. I know I did. They see this thing called pedestrian PIP. Well, what that means, pedestrian PIP means that, okay, the vehicle that comes into contact with a pedestrian is the one that owes the PIP or no fault coverage. All right. We decided that with car wrecks.
Under this pedestrian PIP.
Well,
section, not normal PIP, but under the.
Now, you threw me off.
Sorry, that jumped in.
Remember, do you not remember the first podcast? Let's go back here.
I was there.
No fault is paid by the vehicle you're in, the insurance company for the vehicle you're in. Yeah. If you're a pedestrian, it's paid by the vehicle that comes into contact with you, okay? So what I'm saying on the pedestrian PIP is they're calling it pedestrian PIP, but it's no fault coverage for the pedestrian, not the motorcyclist. You follow me?
Right. So if you're looking quickly at your policy and you see PIP,
yeah, it doesn't cover you.
It doesn't cover you. It's for the pedestrian.
It's saying, hey, look, legally, we know if this motorcycle hits somebody in a crosswalk that we're going to owe this, so we're going to charge them an extra $50 a year to cover that possible expense. So it does not cover them. Ideally, a motorcyclist would have in their own policy uninsured coverage of $100,000 per person, underinsured coverage of $100,000 per person, and then the optional PIP or no fault coverage. My experience talking to motorcyclists is that the no fault is the most expensive, and that's the one they don't tend to do. Which that's their choice. I'm not going to fuss at them for not doing that, but they need to understand immediately the law penalizes them and treats them like an uninsured motorist, and says you can't recover the first $10,000 of your medical bills or lost wages, even though your bike is insured. It's lawfully insured. It's lawfully registered in the state. Completely unfair, but that's how it works.
But it's a question of math, and if that adds $100 or $200 to my policy premium, until it hits $10,000, you're still coming out ahead.
I don't.
More or less. I mean, I think if we did that, because I'm automatically out $10,000 if I don't have it.
Yeah.
So what would be the increase in my premium to have it?
I think it's pretty substantial. I'd have to defer to an insurance agent on that one.
That's going to vary by insurance company, but.
I mean, most motorcycle policies I've seen are very cheap because they don't have it, and that's why motorcyclists like them. But I think it's pretty substantial, and I don't know if I could justify it on that. I hear what you're saying, but again,
it seems like I'm automatically in the whole $10,000. If I paid 1 or 2, premiums, I'm still probably going to come out ahead.
Well,
I would think to have the PIP coverage on my motorcycle.
Well, and remember something. We're talking about the severe accidents, okay? So it may or may not apply, but then again, that's another reason to go back to attorney fees and everything else. What's your attorney's policy on fees? I mean, can his fee exceed, for example, your net settlement? We talked about this before. I have an unwritten policy where I won't do that, right? Well, again, if you're immediately in the hole $10,000, you've got to have somebody knowing what they're supposed to be doing to basically make sure that they're minimizing the impact to your settlement. Okay, and how we're going to do that probably is health insurance.
So as we look at this segment, I guess advice or rule number 1, before you really hit the road this season, sit down and review your coverages. Make sure you understand what you have. Call your agent if you have a question. Call Jim Desmond if you have a question about your coverages. Jim's not an insurance agent, but you deal with this, Jim, every day.
Right, and I always say it's kind of interesting because. I'm not stupid. I know personal injury attorneys have a lot of naysayers and such like that. But This advice of $100,000 across the board of uninsured and underinsured coverage, there's not an insurance agent around that can tell me it's wrong. There's not a personal injury attorney around that will tell me it's wrong. And you're not required to use any particular personal injury attorney or anything else from this. So it's one of those that it's just good, solid advice before you ever get on the road, because again, you need to understand that the problem we have with motorcycles is there's very little to protect you from the kid who's, driving a Chevrolet and texting and rear ends you and sends you to the hospital with, a $20,000 or $30,000 bill. So yeah, before you even get on the road, absolutely, those are what you need. And I never mind looking at those policies. It's the same. It's the same advice we gave before on automobiles. And I let's say your worst case scenario. Okay, I would love to see this. Your worst case scenario. Let's say there's no exclusion and both policies apply. Well, great. You're in a situation where there's more than enough insurance coverage, and we won't have to worry about things. I'm going to throw in,
and that's a good day, because a lot of times you're trying to find another source of income out there for the injured victim, your client. Ideally, there's more than enough to go around. Typically, that's probably not the case.
A little side note here. When I do hospital calls on motorcycle accidents, okay, you go up there, somebody's unfortunately still hospitalized for a day or two after the accident. I never care for it, because I feel like I'm the doctor that is going to give advice, when you're going in to get plastic surgery, okay, that he has to tell you, you could die from this, a million things could happen. And the reason I feel that way is because we don't know the scenario. We don't know, was this car really insured? Was the person operating it the same who owns it? What kind of coverage is on your motorcycle policy? Is there exclusion that applies, or is there an automobile policy that can apply? We don't know all those things.
It's too early.
Right. Well, and I hate to do that to clients, because that's the time they want some reassurance. Yeah. And I usually will say, we're going to talk, within the first 30 days, where I'm going to probably meet up with them again, because then I'll have some answers. But the one thing I have told past clients this, and I have said every time, if they follow the advice about the uninsured and underinsured coverage, this is not you don't have those same concerns, because no matter what happens, okay, you're going to be okay. You get hit by a 1980 Chevette with no insurance coverage, okay, maybe your claim is still, maybe you have, God forbid, maybe you lost an arm in an accident and your claim is worth $500,000. Great. We're not going to be able to recover that amount, okay, under that scenario, but at least we know we can recover enough to hopefully, minimize your out-of-pocket expenses, whether it's deductibles or special treatments or whatever it might be.
And the reality is the variable you can control is your personal coverage via your insurance. You can't control what the other driver has. You don't know.
Right. And
every time you get out on the road, either in a car or on a motorcycle, that's a variable you can't control. So take some steps now to be a little bit more prudent to actually protect yourself in the event that you get into one of these collisions.
Well, and I'm going to be preachy and a little political here. The Motor Vehicle Act was passed, I think, in 1976. That set a $25,000 minimum limit 50 years ago, okay? The fact that we're 50 years down the road and we're still acting like $25,000 has the same value today is insane. So again, the only way you can protect yourself is by putting on your own policy what you need. And again, I'll tell you the little secret I use is I drop the rental car coverage, I increase my deductibles. I don't have collision coverage on all my vehicles, so that again I can afford this other kind of coverage. Because yes, I know car insurance is expensive. It's you pay a ridiculous
amount. If you got a couple of teenage drivers in the house and everything else, it becomes complicated. But again, every couple of years you need to be sitting down reviewing the policies, because life changes, your situation changes, things are just different.
Right, and people do that and I'll preach about this for a second. They do that for liability coverage. They understand that if I get my assets, going in the sense that I pay my house off, I don't want somebody to be able to come in and sue me and take it away and all those other things. And that's great that they do that and say, hey, I need to increase my insurance coverage for that. But they forget to increase the uninsured and underinsured, where you're not at fault. You're the one that was responsible, and yet we don't necessarily have a recourse because this other person didn't have the insurance they should have. So
again, you started off this segment by talking about, assuming you're making a hospital call, you're meeting with a client or a prospective client in the hospital, and you guys are talking about this, and that happens. You might go to their house, you might have to go to their hospital room to answer questions. There are some other things they need to be thinking about at the time of the accident or shortly thereafter, and some of that comes to documenting the extent of the damages beyond just medical reports. I mean, pictures help.
Oh, I love pictures. I tell all my clients, and this again applies to both car and motorcycle accidents both, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I tell them, look, take the picture in such a way that I have to forward it to an insurance company down the road. So I don't want anybody to be inappropriate or cover your towel. Take towels where you need to or whatever else, But, bruises, lacerations, all those little things, I mean, they make it clear that it's not a typical car accident, motorcycle, accident case, that you actually sustained a hell of an impact.
Yeah.
At the accident scene, if you're not able to take a picture, okay, which is totally understandable, then if your family members show up, tell them to pull out the cell phone and start taking pictures of the location of the vehicles, which lines they're in, which lane more correctly, but which lines have they crossed. Okay. All these kind of little things help. One of the biggest things I've been doing lately that has helped immensely is looking for the video cameras, not only now in the commercial businesses, but the ring.com and such like that, where I've hired an investigator and she'll go out and look for these videos. It can even be the video doorbell, and we find it of the accident. Because again, there's two things really one thing you need to remember when it comes to this. You're preparing for the possibility that you're going to be in a lawsuit the minute that car wreck happens. And the lawsuit, if it happens, is 2 years from now. So when it comes to your damages and proving fault, what's one of the best ways to do that, which is to have pictures documenting the damage to the vehicle, the location of the vehicle at the accident scene, your bruises, your lacerations, your stitches, whatever it might be. And I always tell my clients, I have them forward every picture they ever take, because to me, I can scan those to one of these electronic clouds, and they're there. And so this case goes on for 4 or 5 years, and we get a discovery request down the road saying, hey, give us all your pictures that you took of the scene. We've got them.
Well, and your system might allow you to be a little bit more organized than your client, who's probably got a life-changing event here where they're going to be in the hospital for a while. They're going to have trouble getting things organized as best as they would like to.
You hit on something that you didn't. Yeah. You and I haven't even discussed that, but it's funny you went there. If a client does not retain an attorney, that's fine. I'm not going to fuss about that issue. But if you take pictures, forward it off your cell phone to a laptop or a CD, because I've had so many people say they've changed phones or their phone got damaged and they lost the pictures that way. Absolutely. Right. And do not post things to social media. Anything you post on a car wreck or motorcycle accident to social media can come back and haunt you. Okay. Now what happens when we get into litigation is we'll get a discovery request that will say, give us all your social media accounts, and they'll even make us download it and print it up and all this other fun stuff. And the stuff that can come back and haunt you on there is it's ridiculous. You're making a statement that, again, 2.5 years from now may be taken out of context and not express it where you want to. So
right, and you may not remember all the facts, all the circumstances around that situation, but I've got a picture that shows you able to do this or able to do that, or you made this statement. It's hard to refute that stuff. Right.
And the best way is, again, just take it and put it in. Save it to a laptop, save it to a disk. If you retain an attorney, send it to them. Send them everything. I tell my clients all the time. That's why I love using my cell phone, because I'll get 10 texts in a row of pictures of an accident scene, and I have to transfer them to email and then save them up and all this other stuff. But guess what? They're there when we need them. That's all that matters.
They're preserved and they're safe and they're ready to go when you need them. Yep, absolutely. So one of the things at the accident scene you talked about, and we've covered this a little bit in cars, but again, we're focusing on motorcycles here. Get the police report. Get that done. Usually an officer is going to show up and he's going to start documenting things. And what should they be concerned with?
Well, in the police report, remember, okay, I like to get it through buycrash.com. Okay.
And why is that?
Well, it's easy. It costs me $10. I can print it up off the internet. I don't rely solely on that method, but basically it gives me a way to get the police report without going downtown and get it quickly. Okay. And I always start checking a day or two after the accident, even though they tell you it takes 3 to 5 days.
In French, just for convenience, if you have the show notes to this podcast, I'll have a link to buycrash.com. And again, that's BUY crash.com. I'll put a link in there for it to make it easy.
But on the police report, I want to point, again, back to this applies to car wrecks and motorcycle accidents both. That's going to be what lists the name and the address of the at-fault driver. But below that, it's going to also list his possible insurance company. Okay. Now, Usually the designation, if you look, there's a code on the police report. 01 means it's the driver. 08 means the owner of the vehicle, okay? If the insurance company is listed there, great. If not, then we have to sometimes, run the plate. But that's one of the things we're looking for right off the bat. But something I want to stress, particular to motorcycle accident, a police report always tries to determine who's at fault, all right? It's not determinative in the sense that it can't go in front of a jury. It's considered hearsay and all this other stuff. But it tries to say who's at fault, and usually they'll put the number one driver at fault, or more correctly, they'll list who they think is at fault as the number one driver, okay? And then the narrative will describe that. Well, remember something specific to motorcycle accidents. Kentucky's pure comparative fault, all right? So that means if you're 95% at fault for a wreck, you can still recover 5% of your damages. Well, if 5% of your damages, is huge, okay, and above the policy limits, you still could have a policy limits case even for a car wreck that you're not necessarily considered, or for a car wreck that you are considered mostly at fault for.
And so that, again, having the right coverage in place always comes into play, because the other driver may try to come back and go, well, you know what, we're splitting some of the damage here and some of the fault, so I'm gonna file a claim against you while you're filing a claim against me. I mean, does that happen?
Sure. That's why, again, a liability policy needs to be on the motorcycle policy as well. Now, and that happens. I mean, you register your vehicle, you're required again to have a certain amount of liability coverage. Yeah. Okay, so that happens regularly. But that absolutely, and this is again for motorcycle and car wrecks both. If an insurance adjuster says to you, okay, we're not going to accept 100% fault, we want to argue you were speeding, and we're going to say you're 20% at fault, and that my guy was, the other driver was 80% at fault. The problem is the other driver has a claim against you for 20% of their damages, and that means not only the pain and suffering claim, but the medical bills and 20% of their car damages. So, but again, if you're going to get in that scenario, I'm going to tell you to talk to a personal injury attorney on that one, because I've seen those arguments. I've gotten around some of them. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. The percentage of fault may or may not be relevant, because again, it depends on what your damages are.
So you've got the police report. You've got the officer taking down some information. Is going to make some preliminary. He's going to assign fault, at least in that documentation. Now that you guys obviously are going to argue that or try to clarify that. If it's not going the way you want, when you actually get into filing the claims. But the next thing is you've actually got to open the claim with the insurance carriers.
Right. And as a matter of fact, I mean, if I do it, what you're doing is you're calling the insurance company and saying, hey, I've got to open this claim. So first thing you got to have is your police report in front of you, so you can say their insured's name is this, their address is this. We might have to run the policy number on the police report may or may not be right.
Right.
We might have to run the insurance, the plate of the vehicle to see what insurance they had last time the vehicle was registered. But the short story is we got on a little 20-minute phone call where we're telling this insurance company their guy did this, this, and this, and they assign a claim number. At that point, I send up a letter of representation to them with the police report, and I say, this is what's happened. This is, my client's damages, and we get the ball going. And, of course, they're going to have to open the claim and start to investigate it. One of the biggest issues on that people need to understand, and I this is the part I always cringe on, don't assume anything, and don't assume an insurance company gave you proper information on that. And what I mean by that is, okay, you call in there, and I'm going to pick on State Farm for a second. You call State Farm, and you say, this is the policy number, and they say, that's not a good policy number, or that's not Mr. Jones's policy number, whatever it might be. Well, there could be 100 reasons they're not pulling it up. And that's, again, where I sometimes have to run a plate or try it through a VIN number or something else. Because, again, remember something we talked about with car insurance before in one of the prior podcasts. You can have insurance coverage on a driver of a vehicle or the vehicle itself, or both. Okay? So, again, if I give you my car keys, you've got my insurance as primary because it's what covers my Honda. Okay? Your insurance is secondary. Well, either one of those can apply. All right? There's a priority issue and everything else, but we'll see what happens with that. But for the moment, the key is you call that claim in, and you don't necessarily I don't want to say you don't take them at their word. You make sure you thoroughly investigate if there's coverage on that vehicle, who it's with, and such like that. I'm going to divert for 2 seconds here. I've got one claim right now on that same issue that the vehicle had just been sold, and I have had to go through Oh my goodness. I've had to talk to 2 car dealerships, 2 different insurance companies denying coverage. And I'm trying to think one else because we're like 6 months into this and we're trying to find insurance coverage on this vehicle and it's still not even clear where that is. So, but yes, once you have the claim open, you're also going to want to open the claim with your own insurance company. In this case, if it's a motorcycle accident, it's going to be your motorcycle insurance. Now, the thing you're going to need to realize right off the bat is most likely you don't have that PIP coverage. So when you're at the hospital or you're starting to get phone calls from the hospital, you're going to want to make sure you give them your health insurance because that's going to be most likely the one that pays your medical bills, okay? Now, you may have to stress that to any hospital or doctor because of the fact that PIP or no fault is supposed to be primary over health insurance. But if there's no PIP, obviously health insurance kicks in. Again, though, and I'll come back to this in a minute, remember, it's not a freebie. If your health insurance pays the bills, okay, and especially if you're trying to handle this yourself, if your health insurance pays the medical bills, they have a lien against your case to say, we have a right to get our money back, assuming you recovered from that fault party.
And we commented on that in previous episodes, that a lot of people forget about that. Just because you got a big check doesn't mean it's time to go to Disney.
Right.
You know, there could be some other, but an experienced personal injury attorney, Jim, you do this for your clients. You're going to be looking at all of those bills that could still be coming, and you're going to do your best to prepare in terms of what money actually gets dispersed, how it gets dispersed. And again, that comes back to one of your earlier comments about it's not how much necessarily you get in on the right hand, it's how much you can save in the left hand for your client.
Well, yeah, because you've got to reduce those bills. And you can't just ignore, you know, health insurance, you just can't ignore the lien anymore. It used to be they were a sleeping lion 10 years ago, okay, and they didn't have their act together. Now they have their act together, and what happens is, let's say you have a bad motorcycle accident. I've seen this 100 times. If the damages are if the damages are high and the insurance coverage is not where I want it to be, I might be able to get that case settled in 90 days because, again, if I can collect all the insurance coverage that's out there for my client, I might as well get it for them as quickly as possible. Well, if I ignore that health insurance lien, okay, what would happen is a year and a half, 2 years from the time of that settlement, they'll come back and say, hey, we want our money back. And one of the things two things.
Basically, they're making an effort to be reimbursed for the money they paid on your behalf.
Right. And this is the part that drives people nuts a little bit. I have one case that's settled right now, and it involves, the person, my client receives Medicare, but Medicare probably didn't pay anything. But Medicare is what we call a super lien, which means they have a right to basically recover. If I ignored it, they could sue me. If the insurance company ignores them, they can sue them, even after we've all paid everything out, okay?
Right.
Medicaid, very similar. Okay, Medicaid state-based, Medicare, of course, federal-based. So on those cases, for example, that settlement, we've got it all done, and I'm trying to get it all done, but the check is not being issued until that insurance company can get a letter from Medicare saying this is what's required, and we're still waiting on that. Again, can it be a huge advantage? Sure. If I have a client who has Medicare, and we talk about these $60,000 in medical bills, and if they were paid out, years ago, I'll tell you one. I represented my aunt, and the short story was her medical bills were over $40,000. She was a Medicare recipient, and I think the reduction rate, because Medicare has such a good reduction rate with these hospitals, I think they paid out $12,000 or $13,000 worth of medical bills. So back to a trick. This is something cars versus motorcycles. If it's a car wreck in that scenario, and you reserved your no-fault coverage, all right, you got $10,000 of no-fault coverage, you can direct that no-fault carrier to satisfy that health insurance lien, and that way, out of your settlement, well, in my little scenario I just gave you, you might be paying $2,000 out of your settlement, but $10,000 would be covered by your no-fault insurance, right? Well, of course, the motorcycle accidents aren't the same way because you don't have that no-fault insurance, so you can't do that. Did that make sense, Jim, or not?
I think that makes sense. I mean, but at the same time, you don't have a duty to make sure that they recover all of this, correct?
Correct. I mean, when it comes to health insurance subrogation, that's what we're talking about. Health insurance subrogation, pull up, if anybody wants to Google it, ERISA subrogation, right of reimbursement. If you look at your insurance policy, it might say coordination of benefits. The duty for us is not to make sure that Humana or whoever it might be, or Anthem, recovers every cent they pay. our duty is not to impair their subrogation interest. So that means we've got to put them on notice. We've got to give them the opportunity to basically tell us what they paid, and we got to get them paid back. So one of these little tricks that maybe I don't want to put this on the podcast. If I have a horrendous
just between you and me.
Yeah, right. If I have a horrendous motorcycle accident and Anthem says to me they paid $1,500 worth of medical bills for my client, okay, and my client needs surgery or something down the road, if we get the case settled and I send them their $1,500, they still are responsible for my client's future surgery. You follow me? In other words, you're
interesting.
Yeah. So, because think about it, a health insurance contract is just that, a contract. Well, what's the duties of the health insurance carrier? The duty of the health insurance carrier is to pay your medical bills if you're injured. What's your duty when it comes to a car wreck? To not impair that interest. Did you impair that interest? No, you paid them the $1,500. They told you they want it back. But it doesn't relieve them from the ability to pay future medical bills. Now, I'll give you another little scenario though. One time, and this is why you can't avoid health insurance liens. One time, I successfully argued that their contract language was lousy and they had no right to recover anything, okay? In that case, their contract language did allow them to take a future credit against future medical bills. So instead of us paying them, I think it was $4,000 or $5,000 out of the settlement, they were able to say they weren't going to cover the future medical bills for $4,000 or $5,000 worth. In that scenario, my client had other means, so he wasn't worried about it. He was still preferred that way. But again, that's why you can't just ignore a health insurance lien and say, oh, my attorney's not working for me or something because they're making me pay back Medicaid. No, they're doing it to protect you so you continue your health insurance coverage and so people won't get sued down the road when we get this case all done.
Friends, in the interest of time, we're going to wrap up episode 9 at this point, and we'll continue our conversation with attorney Jim Desmond in 2 weeks. So tune in again for episode 10 coming soon. That's it for this episode of the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Jim Desmond will be back in 2 weeks to provide information you need to know related to car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. Until then, check out attorneydesmond.com. You can also follow him on Facebook at Attorney James Desmond. Drive safely, and please remember to buckle up.